something.
So, welcome to our colloquium. It's a pleasure to introduce today Dr. Mike Reiter from Carnegie Mellon. Mike is the technical director of CyLab at CMU, which is one of the first center-scale or large-scale centers for security research. Under an NSF award, a very prestigious thing. Mike received his PhD at Cornell, and his work was, I believe, one of the first to combine fault tolerance, reliability, and security. And he worked on several important systems. From Cornell, he was at Bell Labs for a while, where he led the computer security group, and then finally he wised up and decided to go to Carnegie Mellon and join the academia. So, Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Virgil. Well, that was a nice intro. You sound like I did some stuff. Nice. Okay. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Mike Reiter. I am on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm going to tell you today about a project that we have, kind of a deployment project going on at Carnegie Mellon called Gray. And maybe by the end of the talk, I'll have enough courage to tell you where the name Gray actually comes from. In the meantime, I'll leave you in suspense, wondering what that means. What this is about is it's a project to utilize the proliferation of converged mobile devices. Converged mobile devices is a fancy industry name for smartphones. Okay, you know what these things are. They match evolved OS and application environments with wireless telephony. You're probably familiar with lots of the producers of these things, or some of the leading producers. What's interesting about them from our point of view is that they are on a trajectory to be the first truly ubiquitous computing platform that we collectively use as the human race. Okay. In fact, last year, in 2004, the mobile phone market, not the smartphone market, the mobile phone market, shipped more than one phone per 10 people in the world. Okay, and this is the market that these devices are inheriting. They're fully programmable, right? They're increasingly capable. And so for the first time, what we're going to have is truly ubiquitous computing platform, okay, in the not too distant future. And in fact, it's not only going to happen just through market pressures, but it's a stated goal, in fact. The UN has set a goal of 50% access by 2015 to mobile networks, okay, as it has identified mobile devices, mobile phones, as one of the determining factors in the productivity of industrial societies. In addition, though, a new World Bank report notes that 77% of the world's population already lives within a mobile network, or in range of a mobile network. And so, at least in terms of coverage, we're certainly on our way there, okay, already. Now, along with this, and along with the proliferation of these smartphone devices, comes a range of new possible applications, and that's what Gray is really about. We're not the only ones who are exploring what these applications might be. In fact, Docomo has for several years been out front in exploring what new applications these phones might be. So, for example, Docomo, back as early as December 2003, started a trial in which they were using Felica-equipped smartphones essentially to replace apartment keys. There was an apartment building set up so that you could enter your home using these things. You could pay utility bills with them. This year they announced merging this platform with the existing train fare system, so people can now pay for their train fares, pay at restaurants, convenience stores, and shops. And so what you're starting to see is the replacement of day-to-day, if you want to call them security mechanisms, physical keys, dollar bills, things like this, right, conveying credentials to do something with a device, okay? By the same token, I've recently heard about a trial in Frankfurt, Germany, where Nokia is using cell phones, smartphones, to pay for bus fares in the Frankfurt buses. So that's another example of this. Now, Gray is a similar vision, except we have our own take on it. Okay, it's a little bit different. And where it departs from what others are doing right now is that if you look at what these trials are about, what you see is that existing efforts are utilizing the device as a replacement for existing mechanisms, okay? Again, physical keys, physical money, this sort of thing. What Gray is about is saying, look, now that we have a capability, rather than just coalescing other things within it, can we think about new ways of using the capability that we couldn't use before, or we couldn't have done this before, because of the physical constraints of the mechanisms, the physical keys, the money, whatever we were dealing with. And so the kind of applications we have in mind are things like, I would like to be able to loan you my car, okay, but I don't really have to give you my phone to do it. Okay, right now I'd have to give you the keys, right? But I'd rather just somehow loan you my car without giving you anything, at least nothing tangible. For example, send money from my phone to my daughter's phone if she needs something remotely. Another example is give my secretary temporary access to something like my email, so she can check my email, but yet not give her my password so that she can do everything for me, okay, in the computer systems. Or that she can keep doing things like this later, okay, so it's a sort of a finite duration credential, if you will. And yet another example, which is one I really like, is the notion of going to a hotel and there not being a front desk anymore. Okay, so you walk into the hotel and your phone shows you what room you're in, and you go up to that room and the door just kind of magically opens because you're supposed to be there for the next 3 days. And by the way, all the payment gets cleared in the background. Okay, you don't have to see that. Okay, and there's just, all there is rooms. There's no front desk anymore, unless you want a wake-up call. But presumably you can program your cell phone to do that too.
This happened in Japan and they probably.
Sorry?
This happened in Japan and they went with the bad way.
They went the bad way with it.
I hope that.
Okay, I'd love to hear what the bad way is. Hopefully we're not going in the bad way with it. We'll see. But if we are, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
That's not my perspective, it's a fact.
Okay.
And I'm doing it. I'm innocent.
Okay, I see. Now, but a key aspect of many of these kinds of things, we like to be able to do them from a distance. Okay, the things like loan you my car. Okay, there's really no reason I need to be here to do that. Rather, I could be halfway around the world. And because of the magic of the cellular phone network, I can do this through the phone network and just should work, kind of, if we can take care of some minor security things and so forth. Okay, so that's what really Gray is about. And what I'm going to tell you about today are some of the piece parts that are going into this project. As I mentioned, this is a deployment project. This is more than a planned deployment. This is something that we're sort of halfway into. We're kind of up to our knees right now in this process. This is a picture of the second floor of a building that we moved into in June. And what I've done is I've circled in little red circles all of the doors that we are equipping to control through this kind of infrastructure. That is so that I can access my door using my phone, and I can also delegate to others the rights to access my door if I'm far away and so forth. If somebody needs to get in there to get a book or a new computer or something like that. And right now, essentially what we have is we have, just to let you know how far we are, we've equipped all these doors here, okay, with the necessary infrastructure. Basically, when we built the building, we put all the electric strikes in place, and then what we're doing is we're going in after the fact and burying little computers in the walls that the phones can connect to through Bluetooth, and that's sort of the basic infrastructure that we're building from in this project. Now, several capabilities of smartphones are of interest to us in this project. One of them is, of course, the good data connectivity. So as I mentioned, we're going to be using Bluetooth from the phone to the door, that is the computer that's controlling each door, to talk between those two. In addition, we need to use the data connectivity of the phone more broadly, such as right now you can have 2.5 to 3G connectivity, of course. You have a range of messaging protocols as well. I read an article just recently about a 4G trial. You can get sort of multiple video streams over 4G now with these small devices. Well, you can't get them sort of widely deployed, but trials have shown that the data rates are going to be very good. Also, with this, you also have growing computation power in the sense that public key cryptography is certainly within range on these platforms. These are numbers off of a fairly dated Nokia 6600. This is now a platform that's over a year old. If you're familiar with public key cryptographic computations, you're very familiar with the computation of the form x to the y mod z. Okay, that underlies virtually everything we use in some sense. And what we see here is that for realistic sizes, say x and z of 1024 bytes and y of 106 bits and y of 160 bits, you're looking at about a half a second to do that computation. It goes up to 2.5 seconds if you have a 1024-bit y as well, but certainly these phones are getting faster year by year, okay? And so this is well within range. Another thing that is perhaps a little surprising that we rely on is the fact that it has rich graphical input and output devices. The output is natural, right? It has a little screen, you can display things. It also has a rich graphical input device, which is a camera. It may not be immediately obvious how you would use that right now, but it turns out to be critical for the kinds of things we do, and I'll explain that as we go. By the way, please interrupt me with questions, concerns, or whatever, okay? Now, there's a number of challenges that one comes across when thinking about trying to deploy a platform like this. One of them is building a sufficiently flexible authorization infrastructure. We don't want to have an authorization infrastructure that is special to doors or cars or the hotel or whatever it is we're going to be doing. We'd like a very general infrastructure, and I'll talk some about that, that supports modes of access but also delegation, okay, at a distance. Another thing that we're concerned about is device theft, and this is always one of the first things that people get concerned about when we bring this the gray system up. Is, well, what if my device is stolen? Now that I can use this device to get my car and get into my house and move money around, this is a seriously security-sensitive thing now. Okay, what's going to happen if somebody steals it? There's also usability issues, including human-to-device authentication, device-to-device authentication, access control policy creation, things like that. And I'll touch on what we're doing in some of these as well. Okay. Now, I want to start by talking about the authorization infrastructure that we're constructing. It derives from a long history, I guess, well, long, started, I think, 1992, in what I'll refer to as logic-based access control. The basic idea that Lamson et al. Proposed in this paper was the notion of modeling an access control decision procedure by a formal logic. Okay. Now, access control, if you're not familiar with it, is simply the way by which a computer, a reference monitor, reaches a yes/no decision for a request. Okay. It says yes, I'll allow it, no, I won't. Access control is how it goes about reaching that decision. Now, in the logic that Lamson et al. Suggested to encode this in a logic for different concepts, things like strings, right, to represent people. So Mike or Luyo might represent people. CMU Hammerschlag Hall D208 might be a resource that could be written in the logic. In addition, channels, which for the purposes of this talk are simply going to be public keys. And these are nothing more than big long hex numbers. But what's interesting in the logic is that we're going to have things like public keys say things. And what that really means, if you're not familiar with this logic, is that a public key can be used to verify digital signature on a statement, a formula in the logic. And in that way, a key says the message or that formula. Okay. Other things that get captured in this kind of logic are groups. So who Mike calls his students or who CMU calls its faculty, okay, would be groups. In addition, there are things like statements. For example, John says the goal of opening CMU Hammerschlag Hall D208, okay, which again might be my office. John speaks for Mike.students, which is a way to convey authority. Okay, if this formula were true, what that meant is that if John were to say something, then we could infer that Mike's students say it. Okay. And another example, which is a restricted form delegation, is that Luyo is delegating to who Luyo calls Mike the right to do a certain goal. Okay. And again, you have to sort of reference names relative to namespaces because Mike is not a unique identifier. Okay. How many Mikes in the room? Okay, only 2. It's a low number in most rooms I'm in. Now, I don't want to sort of drag you through the whole logic, right? The inference rules and all that stuff. I just want you to get the flavor of what can be these sorts of logics. And in particular, the form that we're using, which is a variant called proof-carrying authorization proposed by Pell and Felton in 2000. the basic idea here is that in proof carrying authorization, when a client presents a request for access, it presents in addition a proof in the logic that the access should be granted. That is, that the security policy is satisfied. Now, one advantage of this is that the server can be very generic, right? The only thing the server has is a checker for higher order logic and a policy statement, right? The door, when someone approaches the door, what the door says is you have to prove to me that CMU says I should open, okay? Now, the way by which that proof is constructed is the client's problem now, okay? And it can do so in an application-specific logic that's encoded in higher order logic. In this way, you can even imagine different clients using different application-specific logics to construct these proofs. The door can just have a generic higher order logic checker, and it doesn't care what your application-specific logic is because it's all defined in higher order logic. It gets sent as definitions as part of the proof, okay? What this enables is the expression of very complex policy.
So you have to protect also the logic itself then?
Well, now the logic is just a set of definitions on higher logic. There is a trusted computing base here, which is the axioms for higher logic in the door.
You have a proof characterization technique which I can change.
So you as a client, okay, can, if you choose to, instantiate your own application-specific logic by defining it in higher order logic. Those definitions are shipped to the door as part of the proof, okay?
Yes, but then somebody who wants to attack can capacitate me or the system by changing, by filling with the logic you have in your device.
Now, when you say your device, do you mean
The program.
the client side or the server side? The door?
The client.
Okay. So if somebody, if what you're postulating is an attack where somebody essentially renders your proof generation
Or changing.
incapable.
So, incapable or...
Yeah. And in fact, we don't really care about that because
Okay.
the point is that the TCB is on the reference monitor. It's the higher logic checker, okay, and the policy statement of what needs to be proved. And in fact, we don't care what happens to the client.
That's
From-
in the server, and that's protected.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, how far away I am if I give you the following analogy, okay, 15 years ago we used things like that were based on voice authentication to get into buildings.
Okay.
Now you get into the server or either the server or in the actual thing at the door and you do something and nobody can get into the building who didn't get into the building.
No question, right? That can happen, right? If somebody nukes
You can do
the
that, right?
computer that's controlling my office door, yeah, we're done. Basically.
Happened to me at the eye, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Somebody starts my kid or working in the lab, decided to lock the building.
But that can be done in any way, just flip a bit on the line all the time.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah. There are, however, a number of potential limitations of this approach in practice. In fact, really, the only one who had experimented with this basic framework in any practical way was Leo Bauer in his thesis in 2002. And so, by the way, he was involved in the GRADE project, very much so I was very happy to bring him over to CMU and get him working on what we believe to be the first real, if you will, deployment of this kind of approach in a real system. Okay, so let me give you an example proof, a very simple one, just to give you the flavor of how these things might look. Again, right, someone comes to my door, and in particular this case, my door says you have to prove to me what Mike says to open. Okay. And the phone, which is literally running a little tactical theorem prover, okay, so it gets to work, figuring out what it's going to do. I mean, it might break that sub-goal down into a couple of, or break that overall goal down into a couple of different sub-goals, according to tactics that would be in the theorem prover. So for example, it might say, well, if you can prove this, if you can first prove that Mike signed a delegation from Mike to his students, that students can open work. That one sub-goal. A sub-goal says to open D208. That would be a second sub-goal. If you put these together, because Mike says his, and then they ask to open it, it should open. That idea. The first of these over there might be satisfied by a credential. Now, in fact, we wouldn't have signed some key would have signed it. Certification authorities telling you this key speaks for Mike. We won't go into all that, okay? But you might satisfy this piece with a credential, but your technical theorem prover might break this piece down into a couple of other sub-goals. So, for example, you could prove this if you could prove that Mike signed that John speaks for Mike's students, okay? And maybe it's John at the door. And in addition, you also need that John signed to open. So if John signed this and John speaks for Mike's students, then Mike's students sign it, okay, and so forth. So these two might additionally be satisfied by credentials, and then of course you can finish the proof assemble the whole thing, and send it over the door. And the door checks it, opens, and so forth. Okay. So that's a very basic idea. If you look at how the literature has investigated doing these proofs in the past, they tend to be focused on an approach where the client is doing as much of the proof itself as it can. That is, it starts its backward chaining theorem prover, it reaches sub-goals, it breaks them down further, it goes out and tries to find credentials to satisfy these different sub-goals, and if it doesn't, it keeps doing its backward chaining and so forth. And we're going to call this an eager approach, okay? The way to think about that is, here's my door, here comes John, okay? John's phone discovers the door, gets the policy statement that says, look, you have to prove that Mike says to open, and then John's phone gets going very aggressively and saying, okay, well, can I find a credential that says Mike says John speaks for Mike? Because if I could do that, then I could finish this proof. It can't find that credential, so it goes on and says, well, okay, can I find a credential that says John speaks for Mike's secretary? Because I did find this other credential that said maybe Mike's secretary has the rights to open the store, and so forth. And so we're going to call this an eager approach. The trouble with this kind of approach is that it's kind of like asking for directions by saying, okay, Virgil, right, you know where to go, okay? At the first intersection, do I take a left? No. Do I take a right? No. Do I go straight? Yes. Okay, next intersection. Okay, do I take a left? No. Do I take a right? Yes. So, that, I kind of exhaustively search at every point, and he finally confirms when I've gotten it right, okay? Rather, I should shut up and say, hey, Virgil, tell me how to get there. Because he knows, okay? And this would be a whole lot less verbose if we did it that way, okay? And so that's basically what we're exploring in what we call a lazy approach to theorem proving, a distributed theorem proving, where, again, the problems with the eager approach is that the prover has to request certificates without really knowledge or which ones will be signed, eventually by the person holding a cell phone at the other end of the request, okay? And it also offers no opportunities for the infrastructure to learn from computed proofs, and I'll explain more about that in a few moments. In the lazy approach that we started exploring, basically the idea is that the prover is going to outsource sub-goals to others, okay? So my phone, when I come across a sub-goal that I think someone else could prove, I'm going to lob the whole sub-goal at them and say, you deal with it, okay? It's your sub-goal, presumably you know how to prove this, and please send me the proof when you have it, okay? It turns into far more efficient and usable proof constructions, and also allows the infrastructure to adapt to something called automatic tactic generation, which I'll discuss in a moment. So to give you an idea of how this works, let me just run you through an example, okay? Suppose that John and I have these smartphones that are running gray. In particular, we have these tactical, our door is running gray, and so forth. And suppose I had previously created on my phone credentials that said, I delegate to who I call my students the right to open D208. In addition, I delegate to my administrator the right to do anything at CMU on my behalf. Okay, because in fact she does, right? Truth be told, okay? She really does all the work, I don't. In addition, I give my wife complete authority to speak for me. In fact, I'm really just lucky she gives me any authority at all, okay? In addition, these are things that might be typical certificates. Things like this key speaks for my wife, this key speaks for my administrator, and this key speaks for John, okay? Now, let's say then, here comes John, the first time in my door. Now what's going to happen here is his phone is going to discover my door, and it's going to, of course, get the challenge that says you have to prove that Mike says to open. At this point, John's phone is going to run this tactical theorem prover, backward chaining, figure out it really doesn't know how to do this. Ask John, say, look, do you want help from Mike? And the phone will essentially contact then Mike's phone, okay, and say, look, I need your help with certain sub-goals. Can you prove one of these for me? Now, at this point, my phone is going to get to work as well. At some point, my phone is going to figure out through its backward chaining tactical theorem prover that there's in fact several different ways by which Mike could prove something that is helpful to John here. And this will be the first time I actually see it, which is a menu that comes up and says, look, John wants help, okay? We've figured out that there's basically 4 different credentials you can create that will help John get into this door. One of them is to give him the rights to speak for one of your students, because you had already created a credential that said your students could open that door. Another one is that he can speak for your admin or your wife, or you give John a one-shot delegation to open the door exactly once. Which one would you like to do? Yes, please.
What if Mike and Mike's phone are on the other?
Well, yeah, then John doesn't open the door. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, my general question was, why are you doing any of this on phones? Why not do it on a secure platform that's 24/7, as opposed to doing it on phones?
Well, because here we're actually going to need the user's input. Mike has to make a choice. Okay. Now you could put it on some server somewhere, but then you have to encode the logic in the server about what Mike would want to do.
Well, I mean, the
That's
thing is,
hard
I
to
mean,
do.
there's two questions. I mean, using the phone to, like, say, John is at Mike's door and John requests it open. That's good stuff to get the phone. You need to ask Mike on his phone, can John open your door? That's another thing. But why do logic on a phone? Why not do all of that on some other server that's going to be less vulnerable to security problems and more reliable?
So here's the thing, right? We are not trusting, if you will, the logic of this phone at all. Okay. Ultimately, it assembles a proof that's going to be checked by the door. It's either a valid proof at the door or it's not a valid proof at the door. Okay. This is not in the TCB except for the key. Okay.
Yeah, that's for
That
Mike's
doesn't- right.
input. You're trusting Mike's phone.
You don't trust me.
Well, okay, so if you're asking to trust Mike's phone as an input device, I grant you that.
Well,
Okay,
that's trusting Mike's phone.
fine. But it's not, well, the point I was making is that if you're talking about attacking sort of the logic construction, it's irrelevant on the phone, whether it's done on the server or phone. Now, what I will say is that however you're going to get Mike's input, you better trust that input device. And I don't know how to trust the server input device that's 50 feet away from Mike, okay, when he's got a phone in his hand. Right? So that's really the problem. But here, right, Mike is going to select, let's say, item number 1. At which point, his phone will finish off the proof of the sub-goal and send this over to John. And John's phone will now be able to complete the proof of that Mike says, you know, to open the door. Now, to give you a sense for what that actually looks like for real, I'm just going to play a video that we recorded of how this thing goes. This is a brief demo of how this works. So here comes John, well in fact it's Leo Bauer, but I've been calling him John, who comes up, demonstrates the door's locked, and there's a piece of this I haven't shown you what we're doing yet, but basically he's taking a picture of a barcode that's next to my door. The barcode encodes the Bluetooth address of the computer that controls the electric strike, okay? So his phone now knows what to get in touch with. So his phone's trying to prove it. It's going to turn out that he can't prove it, so he's going to say, do you want to ask for Mike's help? He says, yes. He's going to record a voice message that's played to me when I get the request to explain what's going on. Okay? He's recording that right now. He stopped it. And now he's going to send the request to me. Okay?
Is that MMS, Mike?
This is done through a hacked-together MMS, the MMS replacement that we built. Okay? Now here I am. In fact, I'm somewhere else. My phone pops up and says, hey, John, or in this case, Leo, actually wants to get in. Do you want to help? Okay. Right now we have a user interface problem here. Sorry about that. I'm going to play my message, listen to what he says, then I'm going to choose to help. I get a few options here. I'm going to select the first one. Now, what the options are, you can see their speaks forwards here. They're kind of cobbled together, not particularly nice interface yet. But this actually works. Okay. Now, on the receiving side, there's Leo. He'll get the request and be able to open the door. Okay, and that's basically how it works. I've done this demo live several times from various places, the West Coast and so forth. The real determining factor about how feasible it is to do the demo in a setting like this is the strength of my signal and latency of SMS. And I tried it right when I got in the room, and I decided I'm going to go with the video. So anyway, but that's basically what it looks like. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that once Leo has these credentials, or John in this case, has these credentials, of course he can hold on to them. The next time he comes to the door, he'll discover the door, get the challenge back, and be able to finish the proof right away because he cached all those credentials. Okay. And he'll be able to do that until the credential I gave, Mike says John speaks for my students, expires. Now, in order to evaluate this lazy proving approach, we actually wanted to experiment with a real policy. This is a hierarchical policy that we abstracted from the CMU policy by which space in Hammerschlag Hall at the CMU campus is managed. This policy isn't written down anywhere. It's simply what people have come to understand. And so to distill it out, we had to go interview a bunch of people. You'd be shocked at how many discrepancies there were, right? This person says, yeah, he does that, and he says, no, she does that, and it's all very confusing. Well, we basically came up with this hierarchical representation. You can imagine CMU having a CA that binds principals to keys, and a CMU, another part of the hierarchy, that binds principals to roles. So somebody's a department head, and in that role they have the right to allocate rights to floor managers. They can turn around and allocate people to offices, okay, is the way to think about that. On some of the graphs I'm going to show, we're going to be talking about certain kinds of trees indexed by some parameters, X, Y, and Z. That basically says there's X department heads, Y floor managers, and Z ordinary users under each of the under the floor managers. And so we're going to be talking about balanced trees, but our experiments show that there's really very little difference in performance of this as we unbalance the tree. Now the first thing we experimented with was how lazy is going to compare to eager in terms of the number of messages that are going through the ether in order to complete one of these proofs. What you can see is that when you start to get to the size of a real department, okay, first of all, eager is huge in terms of its costs and messages. Now this is assuming that you can contact everybody in the tree, right, through these messages. Lazy does better by about a factor of 2, but it's still going to be outside the range of what is conceivable to do in a real-sized department like this. So what we started exploring is the notion of caching. And the first knee-jerk thing you would do is say, look, we're going to cache all the positive results that we get. It turns out caching positive results is of virtually no use at all. Okay? And the reason is you see these striped lines, there's no cost savings. Despite your intuition that caching is a good thing, what's going on is that most of the work, in fact, the overwhelming majority of the work is in requests that fail. Right? You've asked and they won't give you the credential you need. So caching the one time you got the credential you need is really of no help. The trick here is to, in fact, cache negative results. Okay? Now, there's interesting issues in how you go about revoking the negative results that you cached. Okay, that's another topic for another time. But nevertheless, once you go about caching things negatively, you can drop the number of messages down into a range where it's still not quite there, okay, but it's getting closer. So you can reduce these costs pretty dramatically. Now, one thing that's interesting about caching is that the lazy approach does give intermediate components of this policy hierarchy the ability to cache things. Right? In the eager approach, this guy's doing all the work to get in the door. He goes out, he gets credentials, and he brings them to him, and he puts them together. And the only place that can be cached is here. Okay? In the lazy approach, where you outsource some goals to other places to prove, once they prove them, they can cache results too. Okay? And so we get caching, in fact, all the way up the tree in the components that are serving the request in this hierarchy. And what that yields is additional savings in the accesses by other people. Okay? So for example, what this shows is an authorization tree with an eager in green again and lazy in the red again. The first eager is the first access, and the solid green is the second access by somebody else to the same resource. Okay? Now what this says is that the work the first guy did didn't help the second guy at all. But in the lazy approach, because of the caching of the infrastructure, in fact, the work that the first guy did can help the second guy quite a bit. Okay? Now, going a little bit further with this, there's an additional optimization that we employ that we call automatic tactic generation. And the idea here is that, in general, there's not a different policy for every single resource that there is. Right? On our floor, right, at CMU, there are minor variations in the policies for the different doors, but ultimately, huge parts of the proof are the same. Because there's this notion of CMU granting rights down the hierarchy, and the top parts of the hierarchy are all the same for all the different doors on the floor. It's just the last part that's different. So the question becomes, could the infrastructure learn from the proof for one door how to open the other doors, and save the work for others trying to open the other doors? Okay? And this is what we call automatic tactic generation. To give you a sense for what this looks like, here is the proof that I showed you before for accessing D208. Now, what we do in this, in automatic tactic generation, is we actually look at the shape of the proof and we remember it. Essentially, we take the top leaves, we go ahead and collapse this down into a tactic, okay? That is to say, right, when the prover encounters something like this next time, one possible strategy it can use to prove it is to go find these three subgoals somewhere, okay? But then what we do is we take the bound variable that refers to the resource, right, D208, in these statements, and we abstract it into an unbound free, that is a free variable, okay? So we replace it with a free variable now. And what this means is that if you need Mike to say open something, okay, maybe the approach you should take is to look for subgoals like this. And it turns out that this can have pretty dramatic effects in the proving infrastructure. So for example, what this shows is lazy and eager with and without automatic tactic generation in one particular tree. And what we have is a sequential access of 4 resources by the same principle. So access 1, access 2, access 3, and access 4. And what we see here is that in both eager and lazy, right, automatic tactic generation for the second request reduces the cost to basically the optimal you could ask for. Okay? And now we're clearly within the range of what's doable in real systems. The difference between eager and lazy, right, which isn't shown in this graph when using automatic tactic generation, is that going back to the gains of the interior of this hierarchy doing the caching, it can also do automatic tactic generation. And as such, even if somebody else came along now and accessed a different resource altogether, not this guy, right, it would still get the interior in the hierarchy benefits of automatic tactic generation and reduce their initial cost dramatically too. Okay? And so this is how we think we're getting within the range of feasibility in terms of actually implementing this on real cellular systems and phones. Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to change topics for a second and talk about the second issue that I brought up that we have to tackle, which is capture and misuse. There's actually a number of good examples and documented cases where the capture of a device or the information on the device ended up being really bad. So things like a case where this guy who headed up some foreign intelligence agency in Israel, he left his phone, I think, in his car. This car got broken into. They stole the phone, and it turned out that there were numbers of agents and Secret Service heads on there, and this was like a really bad thing to happen. Okay. Even worse, okay, there was a case where Paris Hilton's address book got hacked, okay, and Eminem and Christina Aguilera. So this was a server compromise of the stuff that was on her phone, but it could have just as well happened if she lost her phone, right? Or more seriously, there were things like this was a part of a larger compromise, and the U.S. Secret Service agent's account was also compromised in that. You wonder if there was any kind of information leaks has happened up here. Right? For all intents and purposes, these phone numbers are capabilities. Right? These are the ways by which we know somebody. And we have this deployment with keys on these. If somebody hacks these things or gets right, captures my phone, and bite out with a straw. Okay. Now my car's in danger, my house is in danger, etc. Right? So, and so that brought us something we call capture resilient, which we worked on a couple years ago. The basic idea: you'd like your phone not to be useful to anybody except you. Okay? That is, if you give it to the bad guy, and that's the way, it turns into a rock. I should love PowerPoint. I don't know. Anyway, so phones don't come with tamper resistant stuff like that, and so we have to do this in some software way, and that becomes a really hard problem. Fortunately, we have the network nature of the device that we can do this, and so the way we do this is that you can think of there being something in the world, in the network, called the capture protection server for the device. Okay? And what the server does is it authenticates who is holding the device right now before it lets the key on the device be used. Okay? If who's holding that device can't convince the remote server that it's the right person, that is the person who owns the device, then the key can't be used. In fact, it's in there in a way that even if they pulled it out of the phone, there's nothing there that allows them to make use of the key. Okay. Now, in fact, we think of 4 different attack scenarios when we develop this thing. The first one that I kind of use to motivate this is the one up here. Okay, the attacker has the phone. You can think about this authentication to the capture protection server, which is this thing, in many ways. It could be face recognition through the camera on the phone. We're going to talk about it as if it's a pin. So each of these pies is a pin, right? 3, 2, 1 or something like that you put in through the keyboard. But the attacker doesn't know it. So in this case, all it's going to do is kind of lob a dictionary attack against the server and hope to guess it. And in this case, of course, what the server is going to do is the standard 3 tries and you're out thing, just like your ATM does. Okay. Now, the other way you might think about, or a way you might think about implementing this is, in fact, put the key. Don't even put the key on the phone. Put the key at the server, log in through your PIN, and download it, and then delete it when you're done. But this attack scenario kind of rules that one out. So we were also concerned about if the server itself was compromised. We don't want to have to trust the server with our cryptographic keys. Okay? And so we consider this one as well. And in this case, the attacker should gain no advantage in forging for us. Okay? This scenario is a really bad one. Let's not worry about that for now in the interest of time. Let's just look at this one. This one is, if you will, a disgruntled employee scenario, or someone has captured your phone and coerced the PIN out of you. So the attacker here has the phone, also knows the PIN. It can obviously interact with the server to generate digital signatures with this key. But what we would like to do is that once the person realizes their phone has been stolen, right, they can inform the server and say, don't ever let the phone be used again. Okay, so stop the phone from being used forever into the future. And there's some interesting consequences from these different requirements. As I mentioned, this one says you can't put the key on the server. Okay? This one says you can never reconstruct the key on the phone. Because if you did, he could get it, bypass the server altogether, and you could never stop the key from being used in the future. So it becomes a shell game. Where are you putting the key? Right? You've got to put it somewhere to use it. Well, for those of you who know a lot about crypto, there's a tool we can pull out of the box and apply here, which is two-party function sharing. So the basic idea is that in this scenario, the key is going to be broken into 2 different keys, one of which stays on the device, the other one of which is encrypted in a way that only the server can decrypt it. As part of the protocol by which the server is convinced that the right person is holding the phone, the piece that's encrypted for the server will be sent over and decrypted and used in an algorithm to compute, if you will, a partial computation for the cryptographic computation that the user is looking for. Okay? To sign this credential saying that John is one of my students. Okay? Now, you just have to trust me, if you're not familiar with these techniques, that this can be done for a lot of different cryptographic algorithms, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But at this point, this piece of the computation is now sent back to the server, or I'm sorry, the client. The client is able to perform the other half of the computation using the part that it has locally. And it puts them together to form, if you will, the whole digital signature, okay, on the credential. And this is what is then used. Now we have a complete certificate. Now, the known techniques for doing this depend on the particular form of the private key. All of them are based on two-party function sharing. And it turns out that the cryptographic algorithm has a very large impact on the efficiency with which this can be done. Now, what I have here is a table that talks about RSA signatures, algorithm encryption, and DSA signatures. In case you wanted a reminder what those are, okay, I've put their public key and private key operations here. If you're not familiar with them, just ignore these 2 columns, okay? But these are 3 very popular cryptographic public key algorithms, okay? It turns out that RSA signatures, there are known techniques for doing this in 2 messages. That is, 2 messages are exchanged between the device and the capture protection server. There's 2 device exponentiations, where here we're also including a public key decryptions and exponentiation, right? The x to the y mod z thing that I talked about taking a half a second or 2.5 seconds before, that's what these things are, okay? And then there's 3 server exponentiations. Algorithm encryption is similar. There's 2 messages, 5 exponentiations on the device, 5 server exponentiations as well. So these 2 are probably doable. Then there's DSA. okay? Which when we were studying this, there was no two-party DSA algorithm, so we had to devise the best one we could, and the best one we could had 4 messages, 46 device exponentiations, and 50 server exponentiations. You aren't going to do this on your smartphone. You'll run out of battery, okay? So this is basically off the table until somebody smarter comes up with a better algorithm for doing this. These are the kinds of things that we're using. Okay, any questions about this? Yes, please.
It seems like an issue that you have to authenticate to an online server. A lot of times there's information I want to access on my cell phone when there is no signal, specifically phone number I want to call because I can't access it online.
Yeah, so now in the context of Gray, we're primarily using this to defend the reactive creation of credentials, right? Remember, I on my phone get a request, John's looking to get in my office, do you want to help? You could sign one of these credentials. So I'm already online because I got that request. And then I can use this technique to protect my key while I sign in and so forth. But you're right, if you want to encrypt all the storage on your phone, then you'd better do the decryption when you have net. Or there's an alternative that I'm going to discuss in just a second that somewhat addresses what you're concerned with. Okay. And that alternative derives from something we call delegation and capture protection. By the way, this is very different from the delegation and the logic that I was referring to. It's unfortunate we have a naming collision here. But don't think this is in the logic. This is a very different kind of delegation. Okay. What this is a technique by which I, with my phone, can change the capture protection server that I'm using. Okay. So maybe when I'm in Pittsburgh, I'm using the phone on my the server at my desk as my capture protection server. And then when I came here, I didn't want to incur the latency of going back to Pittsburgh every time I want to use my key. And so what I did is I delegated and I changed the server I'm using to say Virgil's. Okay, so I do a single interaction to authorize this guy, and now I can turn around and use his computer, maybe his laptop right here in the room, as my capture protection server. Now remember, that's okay because I'm not giving his computer my key. Okay? All I'm really asking his computer to do is, if it sees too many wrong guesses, that is an online dictionary attack coming from my phone, right, that it should simply stop responding at some point. So he can't run through all the hints. Okay? That's all I'm really asking his computer. Now, at some point, I leave here, and I can revoke that computer, or revoke that server rather, and travel somewhere else. And the security should be as if I was never here. Okay? So his computer doesn't get to keep anything. I authorize a new server and so forth, and you kind of get the idea. I can additionally authorize servers from ones I secondarily authorize. So this guy authorized that guy authorized that guy, and so forth. So that's basically how this works. Now, to the question in the back, okay? The way this might help dealing with disconnected operation is that if I'm about to get on the plane, maybe what I should be doing is delegating the server to a smart card or my laptop that I take with me on the plane and that I revoke as right when I get off the plane and have net again. Okay? So if I choose to put the server in my pocket and take it with me, I can. Okay? It's just that I don't advise it from a security point of view because now if they both get captured together, you're in trouble. Okay? But if you want to sort of do this trade-off between security and usability on the plane, this is the way to go. And it's an interesting divergence, by the way, from how people think about protecting keys on smart cards, right? The traditional way is to say, look, protect the key by putting it on the smart card. But we're saying, no, don't do that. Protect the key by putting the server on the smart card, because that's a more flexible approach. You can put it there, take it off, put it there, take it off, okay? And you still have the key protection that you desire. To an extent, I'm glossing over some other details there that many of you, I'm sure, are picking up on, but to a first approximation, it's kind of true. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, so I have, what, about 7 more minutes? Is that right? Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is a usability issue that we've been exploring too. Right, we're going to be using this with about a population of 100 people, hopefully in the very near future in this building. So we need to think about things like that have foiled the deployment of lots of public key kinds of systems before, like how we're going to do key exchange and these sorts of things. In particular, when we think about these statements in the logic, where we have Mike says something, well, Mike doesn't say something in logic. Really, a key says something by verifying the signature on that thing. So we have statements like the key says a message. And of course, we'd like to be able to conclude that Mike, or in this case A, says the same message, where this A is a named principal, like a person. This is really traditionally the job of certification authority, that is to tell us for whom a key speaks, okay? And so we need a statement like this, again, typically from a CA, that KA speaks for A in our logic. Now, the alternative that we're exploring in this gray system is rather than have a centralized CA by which we sort of have a big database and everybody tries to really get to each other's certificates, is to use location-limited channels for exchanging these keys and entering them into your address book in a secure way. Now, what is a location-limited channel? Well, when two devices are in physical proximity, they can use aspects of their physical proximity to confirm that they are in fact talking with each other, rather than talking to a man in the middle that's impersonating each one of the other, okay? And there's many different examples of location-limited channels that have been proposed. Things like, for example, physical touch. So the notion of taking two phones, and they have interfaces where if you touch them together, okay, they can exchange information. You can have confidence that the two phones are exchanging information because they're touching, and you'd be able to tell if there's a man in the middle, because there's not much room in the middle, right? You look in there, you see there's no man in the middle, okay? So that works, okay? Now the trouble
is that you have a kind of physical media by which you verify that you touch. Because you do the verification of touching by computer, you have all the same problems.
Oh, no, I'm talking about, so we're standing here, right? You take out your phone and I go wham, right? And I stick my phone right against your phone, I'm looking at it,
Right.
and then I see there's no man in the middle. So I know what phone I'm talking to, right? With my phone.
Really?
Well, you know,
You
I think so. I think so.
You have to trust the software on both phones.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about that. Got to trust the software on the phones, but outside of that, right? I'm not being fooled by, if we're doing this over a wireless connection, for example, right? I mean, I might be looking at your phone and hoping that my wireless connection is to your phone. But in fact, it might be to Virgil's phone, and Virgil has a connection to your phone.
Well, the
It's
question
cleverly
is-
passing stuff through.
Okay, so you put the phones,
Yes.
but they send something to somebody else.
No. All we're doing is we're exchanging public keys between our phones, so I know I have your key. Think about entering, it's like entering your, okay.
You touch it.
Yeah, we touch it.
I intercept the communications, and
No.
I do the thing.
No, it actually
Still
goes
that-
through the physical interface.
But I claim my touch also. I mean, you're not in the phone. Right?
No.
You're looking at it, you touch it.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Then then I come in from communications, okay, and I interfere with
No, but my phone's not listening to your communications, it's listening to the hardware interface. It's touching the thing, right?
what hardware are you talking about?
No,
You have
I'm
two
saying,
wireless phones. They
no,
go through-
I'm saying that the phone has to have a wireless interface.
That's what I asked at the
right?
beginning. You have to have a physical means by which you
Yeah, that's
verify.
right. And that's why I say it's not supported by most phones. You have to have a
That's what I
hardware
verify.
interface for
It
doing
has-
this.
Like when we're doing, remember, when we're doing biometric security,
Sure.
right? You have to get the chip to put the finger out.
Sure.
If you try to go through the same communication, you have all the problems.
But you
Absolutely.
do with the camera in the display.
Bear with us. Bear with us.
Both ways.
Seeing is believing, right?
Yeah, that sounds familiar, right?
Spoiling it.
So the idea is that, right, so you could approximate this by, connecting a wire, or, a cable from this phone to that phone, right? And then they're going to listen on the cables, right? And now you know what phone you're interacting with. Okay? Your phone knows because it's sending over the cable. Okay?
Yeah. Well, when I asked the question, remember I asked him was, it has to have an independent physical means, not the wireless channel, to verify whatever you mean by that.
This is violent agreement.
Yes, we're very happy you pointed that out. Thank you. All right. Okay. So there are other such location-limited channels. You might think about using a wireless, like a Bluetooth or connection or so forth, but that's going to be susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack. Some are convenient. So people have discussed, well, okay, we're going to exchange keys, so I whisper in your ear, type in 8462 right now into your phone, and this is our PIN for our secure exchange, and I just don't see my mom doing it. I really don't. She's not going to get that. You can think about infrared connection, and I don't see my mom kind of lining up the infrared channel either. So what we decided to go with is something that's really hopefully easy to use, which Carl picked up on already. And it's something we call seeing is believing. The idea here is to use machine vision as a sidechain. So if we want to exchange keys, what we do is we cause our phones to display a barcode that contains the key intuitively. And now all I have to do is really take a picture of your phone, and there's software in the phone that's going to find within the picture the barcode and decode it. And this is how your key gets entered into my address book. Okay? Now, the idea here is that I know what phone I'm registering the key for because I'm taking a picture of it. And I guess in theory you could fool me into taking a picture of another phone, but hopefully this is a more foolproof way of doing things. Okay?
You know the trick about how they use cameras to steal ATM transactions in Europe?
Where you take a picture from
The
your
camera
shoulder.
was hidden. The camera was hidden.
Okay.
They took everything that you were doing, and they had something else in the device, and they were able to steal numbers of accounts, including the visual ID, and they were able to replicate it. And it was very, very difficult to get rid of it.
Good. So, but the difference here is that this is not a secret. This barcode. This is a public key. And so I actually don't care who else sees it, right? As long as I know which one I'm getting. Okay. So that's the basic idea. In fact, we have an implementation.
So essentially what you are protecting physically here is the association between the barcode and the phone.
That's right.
But that barcode is public.
The barcode is public. That's right. That's
And
right.
the locality.
Yes, please.
So the point is to actually make sure that the exact key is transferred from phone A to phone B. But it seems like to go away extreme, a well-placed laser or something into the ECE and the other phone could change that. And you could actually get an arbitrary key to be uploaded. And so
Right.
it's just because
I think
changed
it's-
changed the attacks. There's no doubt.
So I'm not prepared to say that it couldn't be done. I agree with you. I think it'd be an interesting thing to demonstrate, okay? Particularly since it turns out to be, in some sense, convenient for the attack that you just described, that the barcode can't fit a whole key, okay? Instead, what we do is we convey a hash of the key, a cryptographic hash of the key, and then we exchange the full key over Bluetooth connection. Now, to your attack, okay, it's rather fortuitous that we do that, because if you lasered the camera and put an arbitrary hash value through the phone, now your task would be to come up with a key that matched that hash, okay? And that would be the trick, okay? But boy, it sure is lucky that we did this for your attack, isn't it?
So
Yes.
you said some other methods were inconvenient, such as lining up the barcode into the IR channel and stuff like that. But telling my mom that, okay, take a picture and now establish a Bluetooth channel, right?
Well, but it all happens transparently.
Okay.
That's the theory, right? We'll see in practice, right? The idea is that it should look like you're just taking a picture.
And Bluetooth is happening in parallel.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And the pairing of the phones, I mean, that's usually, I'm not sure my mom can pair phones.
Yeah, so the idea there is that, remember, we're not trusting who we pair to, because we can
No,
authenticate whatever.
I'm not hitting the security of it, I'm hitting
Just the usability of it.
use,
That's right, that's right.
Yeah. I think my mom knows how to point something until something beeps or a light
Right,
comes on.
right.
But, telling her, okay, now you need to type a pin in and I've had problems pairing Bluetooth devices,
I
which
see,
probably
I see.
doesn't say much about me.
Yeah.
But,
Well, okay, so the other thing we do, remember the video, we were taking a picture of the barcode next to the door, right? So we can actually take two pictures of the phone, right? One is the address of the phone, the Bluetooth address, to avoid the pairing and a discovery business. The second one would be the actual key hash, okay? And that way, through two barcodes, we can get the information in a pretty easy way. And in fact, it doesn't even have to be two shutter clicks. You can just do it. You can capture the image.
I mean, I think you're on the right track of trying to make this thing easier, but it sounds like there's still a little bit of...
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could tell you, yes, we have 100 people actively using it, and they're all very happy. In truth, right now, we have about 4 people actively using it, and they're pretty happy. So, okay, a little bit honest here. But you can also, this is a fun trick, because you can also do other things with it. You can do things like, if you have a device that doesn't have a camera, you can still authenticate its key, right? Your laptop or your base station or whatever. This is a wireless base station. You can even do it if it doesn't have a camera, at which point you can attach a sticker to it, to its housing. Of course, now you have the replacing the sticker attack, right? Somebody comes up and puts a new sticker or something like that, which I'm not claiming we have any brilliant solution for, but you know, it's better than what we do today for sure.
Actually, Mike, so with the door things, is
Yeah.
that a possible attack also, perhaps?
The door things?
I changed the barcode on your door.
Yeah, okay, so that's an interesting point. So it
is that
is,
door
so,
enough?
so somebody, what they could do is they could put, say, the barcode of another door to which I had access, like down the hall.
Right.
And I would think I'm opening this one, but I really opened that one. And that right now is possible, and we're thinking of some ways. I'm happy to talk to you after this about what to do about that. I mean, there's certain usability issues where you can flash in front of the user that says, look, you're opening this door, is that what you want to do? And I expect most people will just shrug it off and go, yeah, whatever, right? But there's other things you can try, and I'm happy to talk to you about them afterward. But yeah, it's a good point. And one thing to deal with that, by the way, is that initially what we're going to do is we're going to put the barcodes taped to the inside of glass that's next to the door. So the best somebody could do is kind of overlay the glass, I guess, and hopefully, well, somebody might notice. Of course, the other thing too is that you're not taking the picture every time you walk to the door, right? You're only taking that picture once. And then it's stored in the phone as the way to open that door. And so if somebody comes up after the fact and puts a sticker over it, that's kind of useless. So, okay. The other thing, the last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to let you guys go, is we're also playing with other usability things that are kind of fun. So when I come into work by a predictable way. So I go in that door, and then that door, and I get on the elevator, and I go up, and I go through this other door, and then I'm out of my office, and I log into my computer. There's no reason why the phone can't learn that sequence, okay? And so the idea is once it's learned it, when I walk to the door, walk up to the front, the first door of the building, I'm going to click what's a path of things that's actually indented here, which says, look, I'm really going to my office to work on my PC, get me there, okay? And now it's the case that as I walk up the doors, they kind of just magically unlock, okay? And I promised you I'd tell you what Gray was about. Well, the name Gray, if you think about this vision,